Hey, welcome back to Whispers of Resilience by Nadia, Becoming Not Breaking podcast and YouTube vlog series. I'm coming at you today to change things up a teeny bit because yesterday when I did my first vlog, I had to re-record for the podcast, and I'm hoping to be able to do this kind of all in one. I was reminded by my younger sister that because she was so little, she doesn't necessarily remember everything from our childhood. And so I do have a few stories and wanted to, kind of slow it down a little bit because I realized that I was moving, very quickly and marking some, key points in my life because I wanted to get to today. Today is super important and I wanted to, get to where I'm at. But, as I was starting this series, I really wanted to, bring you through where I was to get through to today. And, as I said before, I don't want this to be about trauma. This really is, life reinvention. This is about, understanding where I was and, resilient wellness. And so I thought we might just get started with, a couple of stories that I have from when I was younger and living in BC. So shortly after I was born, we moved to Gold River, BC, as I had said in my last podcast. My dad was a millwright, and so he got a job at the pulp mill. It was, a big adventure, and I think my mom was really into the adventure. She lived in Ontario her whole life, and, I just from, conversations that we had and who I feel like she was always up for an adventure and trying some new things. And so, we packed up, we drove across the country from Ontario all the way to BC and jumped on the ferry and drove in through, I believe probably Nanaimo and through Campbell River and into Gold River. So I was about 9 months old when we moved in there, and 3 years after that my younger sister was born. I know my mom, would tell the story about having to get to the hospital because it was a couple hour drive to get to the major hospital. In the, late 70s, early 80s, you went to the hospital. They had to, get going off to the hospital. And I remember going and visiting, my baby sister, and they had a TV with headphones in the room. And that was the most exciting thing. I'll be honest, I don't really remember seeing, my baby sister aside from pictures, but I remember that there was a television with headphones, and I really just thought that was the coolest thing. I know thinking about stories from when I was younger that, my dad worked a lot, and my mom ended up working also at the pulp mill as a in the administration somehow. I don't know whether she was a secretary or what it is actually that she did, but again, it was, the 80s, and I remember that she always would get dressed and, have the pantyhose and the high heel shoes and a dress and matching jewelry and her hair done. And, those are things that I certainly remember. There is a pretty kind of miracle kind of story that I have in Gold River, and this is with my sister and my dad, my younger sister. In Gold River, there's a lot of I'm losing my train of thought, but mill roads or logging roads. That's the word that I was looking for. So there's a lot of logging roads, and we were on a drive with my dad, and we stopped at this bridge, and my little sister and I were throwing rocks into the water. And, I don't know how high up we were, but it was between, a big ravine, and there was a river below us. rushing quite fast, from what I can remember. And we were sitting there, and my dad was, sitting up against his car, and we're throwing in the rocks, and I see this, little person, blonde hair, striped pink and white shirt, I believe even jeans, floating into the water, floating, down into and landing in the water. And I remember being so jealous and turning to my dad and being like, I want to do that. And then realizing, where's my little sister? And I said that to him. I said, where's my sister? And we looked down, and she was actually, so the water was rushing very quickly, going, in one direction. And my sister had somehow managed to get into a pocket, or I don't know if it was a whirlpool or the current was really taking her in the opposite direction. And, from what I could see, as a 5-year-old little girl, it looked like she was face down. My dad, told me to get in the car and didn't hesitate and jumped in after her. And of course, it was a long time, and, it could have been 2 minutes, it could have been 2 hours. I have no idea, but for me, it felt very, very long. And I did eventually, open the door, and I could hear coughing and choking, and they managed to get back into the car. And so, the reality of it was that could have been a very different outcome, but my dad saved my sister. He was afraid of water, and he jumped in and he saved her. And, he would have been 35, approximately years old. And, now that I'm an adult, I remember 35, I remember where you are. And, when I was a kid, he seemed so much older and so much, far away from where I am today, really. And to think that he was able to, push past his fears and save his little girl is a pretty amazing feat. And, I remember going to church with my family. I remember walking and holding my dad's finger. I had little tiny hands, and he had big hands. And he actually had, I think, a farming accident that had cut part of his finger off. And so he had a funny finger with a little tiny nail on it. And, it's something that I remember. I remember being on his shoulders, and, I've certainly seen pictures of him. He liked to take photos. And so I remember pictures of him, driving in, like, set up against the car with a great background from BC with mountains and lakes and rivers and trees. And, it definitely goes back to that idea of nature and what nature can teach us. And, another funny story that I can think of is that it was shortly before my dad passed away, because I want to say it was kindergarten. So I was 5, because back then we only had kindergarten and then grade 1. And my dad was off. The pulp mill was on strike. And so he was, my mom still worked, but he was on strike, and he made my lunch. And I guess it was supposed to be a snack, because I would have not stayed for the whole day. We would have done half days then. But there was a little boy actually in my class who had the same lunch pail. And if I remember, it was the Muppets. And it was an orange lunch pail that, you opened up, and there was so much food in it. And I remember, one of my friends and I said, we have to eat this food. Like, are you hungry? Do you want to eat? Because my dad made this. And it later turned out that it was the other little boys, and he would have had to stay. And so that was his lunch, and I ate his lunch. But here I was, a little girl thinking that, I didn't want to disappoint my dad or make him feel like I didn't like what he had done, and the food that he had given me. So kind of, a funny memory that I have about that. And then, when my dad didn't come home, he had gone out to, I guess, the strike line. And the story is that he drove one of his friends back home and was headed back out, and he didn't come home. And it was a couple of days before they did find him. And I was across the street playing in the neighbor's yard when the police car showed up, and I went running across the street and said, "Oh, they found my dad." And, I was really excited and happy, and I was standing there, and, I can kind of picture it from an outer, I can see myself as if I'm standing over, and, my mom, and looking up at my mom and hearing, not even hearing what happened, but seeing how my mom reacted. And I don't know how much of it is in my mind or how much of it, really happened, but I feel like she, grabbed me on the shoulder and kind of twisted me and told me to kind of get in the house. But I do remember her crying. And at 5.5, almost 6 years old, I really didn't know what that all meant. And, we had lots of friends of my mom's and dad's come around, and in the days, before we went off to where he was buried in Vita, Manitoba, which is where he was born. And I do remember when we came back after the funeral, my mom being sad, and I don't know whether, I caught her crying or just being sad in general. And I said to her, "Mom, come on, like it's just like daddy's on afternoons or evenings," because he had done that. He had worked continental shift. And so, again, as a 5.5, almost 6-year-old, I just didn't understand what the finality of his passing really was, and how it was going to change our family. And I think, my mom tried to find a new kind of normal for us all in BC, and her older sister came and stayed with us, and her younger sisters did drive across country and visit and come and stay for a period of time. But my mom's older sister did live with us and stay with us for a period of time. And I don't think I ever asked my mom why or what made her want to move back to Ontario, but that's what we did. She went out with a friend to Ontario, and they found a house, and then we moved there. And we moved to Oakville. And my older sister was, I believe, 15, I guess. And it was really hard for her because she was 15 and 14, 15, 16. She didn't want to move. She didn't, we were in a very small town in Gold River, like that being Gold River, and we moved to Oakville, and it was very different. And it was really hard for her. And she had to start high school, and, being in a different part of the country, you really are, somewhere completely different, and people, are very different when you move to Ontario. For me, it wasn't quite, so challenging because I had just had kindergarten and grade 1, and I went into grade 2 and 3 in Oakville. But I know it was very hard for my sister. And, after we moved into our house, my mom had a pool put in, and she didn't work when we lived there outside of the home. She took care of us. And it was quite, I remember just kind of always being, my mom and my sister, my little sister for sure, and I do remember my older sister being around, and I remember, teenage arguments, and I think my sister was just really unhappy, and we ended up driving to I think we drove to Manitoba, and my sister got on a bus and continued on back to BC, and stayed with my aunt, my mom's sister, for a period of time. And so then after that, it was just my little sister and I, and we did have family come and visit, and my mom's next younger sister stayed with us for a while. She had lived in Calgary, and her two older children had come back to Ontario to live with their dad. And so she came and stayed with us for a period of time. And so there was lots of people around kind of all the time. And, for me, that was normal to have my aunts and cousins staying with us and living with us. And I think, it was a time when my mom didn't have to work. And we had a home, and she was, trying to make a place for us. My little sister and I used to go visit my grandparents, my dad's parents in Vida on the farm. And we used to go out there, from the time, I believe we were like, I kind of had this image of an airplane ticket, and it was 3 and 7. And I don't know if that's right, because my sister would have been almost turning 4, I guess, and I would have just turned 7. But I feel like that's when we started going out there, just the two of us. And back then, there was a lot more, services on airplanes. And so we would get dropped off at the airport and into the arms, or the care of a flight attendant. And then we'd get on the plane, and then they would deliver us to the named person on the other side, which would be my grandparents. And my younger sister and I would spend the summers on the farm, walking the fields, playing with our Barbies, being in the garden, meeting new friends while we were there. And so I certainly have a lot of memories of the farm and that time, away. And there was one summer we went for quite a few weeks. I can't remember how many, but my mom was remarried by this time, and her new husband went on a kind of trip of a lifetime type of idea. We had at this point moved to Cambridge. We're still visiting our grandparents, and I want to say we were there for like 3 weeks, and that was a really long time for me. And I had a lot of worries that my mom would leave me to. And so I remember she would say, I'm going to call you on this day at around this time. And she was in New Zealand and Fiji and Hawaii. And so she was on the other side of the world. And she didn't call the one day when she said she was going to call. And I was really, really, really upset. And, beyond upset. And I thought that something had happened, and but I didn't want my grandparents to see how upset I was, and I didn't want my little sister to feel that. So I really kind of internalized it. But I did pray, and I asked that she call the next day, and I actually had said by a certain time. And let's just say, for example, it was 4:30 in the afternoon, that please have my mom call me by 4:30 tomorrow. And she did. She called by 4 o'clock, within a half an hour of the time that I had said. And I remember saying how upset I was that she didn't call, because I needed her. I needed to know that she was okay. And it was very, very scary for me. And there were other times, in that age range. I was probably, anywhere from 10 till 13. And if my mom would go out, or away, even for a few hours, I would sit and wait until she got home, because I was just so, at that age, just so worried that something could happen to her too. And at this, age, after my dad had been gone for 6 or 7 years, it really, I was really afraid that something bad could happen to her too. And so, I remember, she had been married not for very long. And, my stepdad didn't have kids of his own. He was a teacher, or is a teacher, retired, but he didn't really, take on a parenting type role. And I'm not really sure, but I remember my mom going to counseling, and I think the relationship was kind of hard and a little strained. And I think that she used to spend time with her sister, who had come out to live with us in BC, was now living close to us in Ontario. And I remember one night, she had been out, and I was sitting at the window and just crying, waiting, hoping that my mom would come home, and when is she going to get there? And I see the car kind of turn into the driveway, and I went running upstairs because I didn't want her to know, how sad or upset I was. And I share this, and obviously there's still some feelings that are coming up about that, but I share this because, when I said yesterday in my podcast about how I didn't realize, what, how I was adapting or what was happening with the loss of my dad, but that really, molded, some of the experiences that I had later on in life, and the fears and the worries, that I had about, having my mom and my sisters so close to me, and the fear that something bad could happen. And I think that, this certainly takes me through into my teenage years, and the choices and the decisions that I made. And I feel like this does kind of take me to a place where I can share, kind of what was next. And when I was, moved to Cambridge, as I said, not that long ago, we had moved from Oakville to Cambridge, and I was in Cambridge for starting in grade 5. And I'm still in Cambridge, so have lived here the rest of my life, except for a short year in Guelph. As I said, this was going to be a bit of a behind the scenes, and the video or podcast is almost about 45 minutes long. So I'm going to stop here for part 1. And if you're interested in watching more, join me for part 2 shortly. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and we'll see you soon.